This is the Katipunan Dialogue Podcast.
Magandang araw sa lahat ng ating mga tagapakinig dito sa DZUP 1602. Welcome to the Katipunan Dialogue Podcast, where we hold conversations about national security and international relations. This is Aaron Mallari, your host for this podcast. We are already on our third episode of the season. Maraming salamat sa lahat ng ating mga taga-subaybay at tagapakinig. Ang programang ito ay hatid sa inyo ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies Strategic Studies Program. Ang UPCIDS ay ang Policy Research Unit ng University of the Philippines System. Ang Strategic Studies Program ay isa sa 16 na programa ng UPCIDS at nakapokus ito sa pag-aaral ng mga usapin sa national security, international relations, diplomacy at foreign policy. Sa ating third episode, we will take our conversation to a more international current event. Mahigit isang taon matapos ang pagsiklab ng digmaan ng Israel at Palestine, ano nga ba ang tutuldok sa nagpapatuloy na sigalot sa rehiyon? In light with what is happening in the Middle East, pag-uusapan natin ngayong araw ang papel na ginagampanan ng United Nations sa pagpapanatili ng international peace and security, pagbibigay tulong sa mga nangangailangan, pagprotekta sa karapatang pantao, at pagpapatupad ng mga international laws. Ang United Nations o UN ay naitatag noong October 24, 1945 matapos ang Second World War. Sa loob ng higit 7 dekada, paano pa nga ba natin makikita ang paggampan ng United Nations sa kanyang mga misyon, especially in the face of a changing world order? We are very privileged to have with us today a career diplomat who has a 37-year track record in the Philippine Foreign Service. She worked as the Director General of the Department of Foreign Affairs Foreign Service Institute from 2009 to 2011 and served as an Undersecretary of the DFA. Nagsilbi din siya sa iba't ibang embahada ng Pilipinas sa iba't ibang bansa. Sa kasalukuyan, siya ang presidente ng Miriam College. It is our honor to have with us today none other than Ambassador Laura del Rosario. Magandang araw, ma'am. Welcome sa DZUP.
Salamat, Aaron. I'm happy to be here. And I just want to point out, we are Katipuneras.
Yes,
because
ma'am.
we are all located along Katipunan
Yes, ma'am.
Avenue. Yeah.
Yun din talaga, kaya Katipunan Dialogue talaga tayo ngayon.
Okay, yeah.
Alright, ma'am. Siguro, ma'am, before we go into the core of our topic and our discussion today, I just would like to start off our conversation today. Siguro ito personal curiosity ko rin to, ma'am. No? Siguro I want to also hear from you kasi napaka-expansive nung experience ninyo sa diplomacy and foreign affairs. I want to get to know you siguro on this particular aspect of your life para na rin sa mga tagapakinig natin na siguro may interest dito.
Yes.
No? So, ma'am, can you walk us through your almost 4-decade career so far?
I joined the Foreign Service actually by accident.
Oh,
yeah, because my background is really English literature. Yeah, and Philippine literature in English. But at a certain point in my life, I wanted to take a PhD in Philippine Studies. And I enrolled here and I gave a dissertation proposal, which is something along the lines of the role of foreign policy in economic, the DFA, only to find out that they don't have a research unit then, because the Foreign Service Institute would be formed, the research center would be formed a little later. So somebody enticed me, said, foreign service officer ka na lang. I didn't really want to. I didn't want to work abroad. Until he said, come on, Simon, take the test. We want to find out if you pass. I passed.
Oh.
So, para bang, sige, panindigan ko na. Parang naging gano'n. So, I started actually taking care of the communist countries because I was assigned to the economic affairs. So, everything from Romania, Yugoslavia, up to Soviet Union. And then, I was monitoring our trade and investment relations there. I was working with the Department of Trade, and the Department of Trade had an arm dealing with socialist countries, the PITC. And then my first assignment was luckily in Vienna. So there I was exposed to the UN because it's the third center of the United Nations. It's focused on social and humanitarian affairs. So doon nabukas ang isip ko, okay, this is how it works.
Okay.
And then, thank God, I was also assigned to take care of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and then the Center for Humanitarian Affairs under then Assistant Director General Leticia Ramos Yahani. He was then an Assistant Director General there. So I was there, and that's how I got exposed to the UN system.
All right, ma'am. So obviously, ma'am, meron kayong first-hand experience with the UN. Pero bago tayo pumunta doon, ma'am, ito siguro isa pang curiosity. So as a career diplomat, no, na sinabi nyo nga na siguro I would put it in my own words na parang napaka-exciting nung career ninyo eh. Siguro, can you share with us, what do you think are your experiences with regard to your career, and how does it fare in terms of you being a woman? Siguro para dun sa mga women listeners natin na nag-iisip ng career in the foreign service.
It's complicated because for one thing, during my time when I entered, I think the number of women, even in our own department, I think they were just 15%. By the time I left, we were almost equal. Okay. So even the opportunities in what posts to serve, they were limited because some posts were identified as male posts, others are female posts, right? So Vienna was considered as a female post because it's the UN, meaning you can put anybody there. But on the negotiation side, every time I attended conferences, my counterparts, I think they did not listen to much. I felt that they did not believe in what I said because I was a woman, and I wonder, I often wondered, I said, if it were a male telling these views, would they believe me? Okay. And then of course on the social side, every time I had to, let's say, host a dinner, I had no wife, quote unquote, to take care of the dinner, to prepare the dishes, to take care of the floral arrangements, and also everything from the sitting arrangement to even what drinks to serve. I did not expect my husband to do that. So I had to do all of that.
Yeah, so parang superwoman din talaga, no, ma'am?
Oo. Parang, it's like being an ordinary woman doing an ordinary job, and then pag uwi mo, ikaw pa rin magluluto, mag-aalaga ng mga bata. Ganon. It's the same.
Yeah. So I think, kaya din, ma'am, super excited ako nga nung pinaplan namin tong episode na to. Kasi we are going to be talking about something na very controversial in a sense, and it's also a current affairs issue. No, something to do about conflict. And I'm so pleased that we are going to be talking to a woman about it. Yun siguro, ma'am, yung isang
the point of view of a woman. Yeah.
A foreign point of view of a woman diplomat. Para how yun din yung curiosity ko, ma'am, and how this conversation would play out, no? Kasi, ma'am, syempre baka iniisip nung iba pag conflict, war, very masculine, ganyan. So parang kaya din masaya na kayo, ma'am, yung kasama namin ngayon, no? So siguro, ma'am, let's start, no? So siguro yung first question ko din, ma'am, let's start with a broad topic, no? So as I mentioned in the introduction, it's going to be about conflict and basically the global governance architecture of the United Nations. No? So ano po ba yung papel ng United Nations, at ano yung inyong pagtingin sa paano nito ginagampanan yung mission niya sa kasalukuyan?
If you're talking about the present, para sa akin parang outdated na yung kanyang structure, because it was built on the basis of those who won the Second World War. Diba? All the
Allied powers.
Yeah, the Allied powers. And then of course the world had changed. And then you have India, and then you have Japan, and they have their own way of contributing to the development of the world, right? And I was ambassador to India, and I felt their pain. Yeah, because for one thing, you are 1.2 billion people.
It's a subcontinent.
Yeah, a subcontinent. And then you are not, and then you have a small island country like Britain, and the other one is in the Security Council, di ba? Parang it's so unfair. Ganon, di ba? And then at the same time, every time there were some difficulties, anything can be vetoed by the permanent five. So iniisip ko, how do you counteract the permanent five? That has always bothered me all the time that I was working in diplomacy.
So, ma'am, would you say that the UN in its almost 70 years of existence, parang has it strayed away from its original mandate?
It hasn't, except that it has become more ineffectual through the years, di ba? They know what they have to do. In fact, we have been trying to open up the discussion on expanding the permanent five so that at least the other countries will be represented. But everybody's afraid to open it up because some people say if you open it to India, what will Pakistan do? Those two should always be together. And then if you have Japan, and then what will Germany do? And of course, better and just keep it the way it is. But at the same time, you cannot move things because look, Asia is represented only by China, and the Chinese interests are not always
aligned with everyone else.
Right. Okay. So ganon. So sa akin parang hindi na siya masyadong effective.
Alright. Yeah. Pero ma'am, diba, syempre as you mentioned, it rose from the ashes of the Second World War. No? So basically, as we all know, the UN is all about, it's premised on cooperation among its member states. No? Pero with the recent events in the Middle East, particularly with Israel and Palestine, siguro in a way nakikita po natin na seemingly, as you mentioned, it's becoming harder for member states to see eye to eye, especially kahit na nandun sila sa framework ng United Nations. Ano po sa tingin nyo yung mga driving forces or factors kung bakit mas nagiging mahirap ang international cooperation? As you mentioned, within the UN,
they should look at the historical and cultural, social aspect of it. Like when Palestine, the state of Israel was created. I mean, everybody knows, they said that Great Britain really promised to the Arabs this and promised to the Palestinians this and promised to the Israel. And then later on, it became so complicated and so convoluted, and that's the way it is. But if people look at the history of that part of the world, it has always been occupied by Israelites at that time. They were not called Israelis, they were called Israelites, right? And it became Muslim only during the Ottoman Empire. So they should have recognized that the Muslimization of that area happened during the build-up of the Ottoman Empire from the Byzantine Empire. And so you are dealing now with two streams of history. The Islamic part of the Ottoman Empire, and then you have the Judeo-Christian side of the Israelites, or the Jews as we call them, or the Israelis as we call them right now. So I don't know how you can place that in the UN, which is a political body, and of course it's made up of sovereign states, whether you are just 450 square kilometers versus a country as big as Russia, the biggest country in the world in terms of land space. You have the same sovereignty, right? Diba? So it's complicated in that sense.
Alright, so ma'am, siguro if we take what is happening between Israel and Palestine at yung siguro responses ng mga member states sa mga resolutions ng General Assembly, ano po sa tingin nyo yung siguro alternative arrangements available para sa pagresolba ng mga ganitong digmaan kung hindi nagiging effective yung platform ng United Nations? Kasi ma'am, halimbawa, may mga mapupulot ba tayo, halimbawa ma'am, na lessons from halimbawa, say experiences sa South African anti-apartheid movement, na yung mga ganitong types ng transitions, may mga ganito kaya tayong available na pwedeng i-explore?
Okay, pwede in a way, if not directly by implication. Kasi yung South African experience, the apartheid, it took really years to dismantle it. And really, the South Africans really had to fight in many ways, diba? They had to go into activism. There were even, deaths and all kinds of horrendous events that happened. And of course, the artists, the writers, they all got into it. But that one is how shall I put it? It's as though it's seen as a colonial power.
Yeah.
Diba? Pero ito they live there, and the Palestinians can say we have always been here, and some people say they may be part of the Philistines, during the battle of David and Goliath. So how do you remove that part of history really? And then unfortunately the difference in religion came in, and so when Israel was created, it was surrounded by Arab countries which did not accept Israel as a state, and that's why it's really quite different. However, in the South African experience, they use the UN General Assembly to promote changes and to start thinking of sanctions. And of course, what prevented that movement to go fast forward is because there were some trading partners of South Africa who resisted it, and the trading partners are the rich countries like Britain again, right? Even maybe the United States, and you have the African nations fighting for this. I think it took a while, and I remember we were a member of the subcommittee against apartheid. I was told that there was a resolution passed every year, and they counted those who changed their minds as the years went on. Parang gradual conversion to the cause. And of course, the movement went globally until South Africa became a pariah. Parang that is the one that when people said, okay, the people of the world are serious. So if you want to go to Israel, you have to go global. Yeah.
How do you see that happening?
Like for instance, there are people who really, okay, if you ask an average young person now, are you for Palestine or Israel? Chances are the heart goes out for Palestine, underdog, diba?
Yes, ma'am.
But the others will say, hey, look at the history of the Jews. Look at what they went through in Europe, whether they were in Portugal or Spain or even Russia. They were oppressed, and look what happened to the Second World War. They deserve their own safe space. We're always talking about safe spaces now, right? So they deserve their own safe space. But then, should they have the safe space at the expense of another group of people? Doon na nagkakagulo. And to think that when they started, initially, the land were almost equal.
Yes.
Parang halos pantay. Ginyera ng Israel, nanalo siya sa Six-Day War, diba? It expanded so much, it doubled its area until, of course, it had to go backwards. But the Israeli found at that time, kaya nila. And I think that Six-Day War made them realize we can exist. Yeah. And of course, the Palestinian, iniisip ko, I wish they settled na and then figure out how. But then, of course, there's the economic part of it. The arrangement on this is the Palestinians should take care of their own infrastructure, they take care of their own, they're not an occupied territory. They're supposed to be independent. But then when you have no resources, how do you build?
Yeah.
Well, Israel had already everything. Okay.
Alright. Pero ma'am, sige, katulad nung binanggit niyo, di ma'am, yung gusto ko yung term na binanggit niyo na parang it became a global conversation kasi yung South African case. But as we all know, I think in many ways the Israeli conflict and what's happening between Israel and Palestine is already a global conversation already, di ba ma'am? Pero ano sa tingin niyo yung effect ng tumitinding hegemonic rivalry between the US and China in terms of building cooperation and collaboration at yung overall idea ng international governance structure like the UN, kasi binanggit niyo kanina na the permanent five has always been there and they have veto powers as we all know. So kapag may mga ganitong conflict katulad nung nangyayari sa Palestine at Israel, how does the rivalry between countries in the permanent five affect UN's capacity to enforce peace?
A lot, if one or two of the permanent five belong to the other side.
The other side.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you try to figure out, will China support Palestine? Diba? That's a question. Will Russia support Palestine? And then, why would they? Is it because the US is known to support
the other one?
From that alone, naka stalemate ka na, di ba? So that's why we always think, okay, don't look at that because sometimes they, as they say, they fight the proxy war. Chances are you don't even really belong to this, but because it's your enemies on the other side, you might as well side the other side. Diba? It's sometimes human nature, right? But if you go global, like you go beyond the UN formal structure of the assembly, the permanent five, go to its arms. Think United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Why not you use that? Okay, to talk about the human rights violations of the Israelites
Against the Palestinians.
against Palestinian. You can do that. You're looking at the economic of it, what's doing to them. Why don't you talk to the UN Economic and Social Committee? Shouldn't they do something about it, right? And then if you're talking about, let's say the various rights, children, punta ka na lang sa children. You can use UNICEF. I say, what should you be doing for the children? Shouldn't you be fighting the cause? You can attack it from many angles until it really become more like, even if you say there is a proliferation of agencies, NGOs, use the NGOs. In the same way, I think some of us would like to use, let's say, the Human Rights Watch, right? If you in relation with the UN Commission on Human Rights. Marami. Kasi once you go into the structure of the UN, talagang mamamatay ka sa
Sa bureaucracy.
At saka sa sovereignty, one nation, one vote, di ba? Oo.
Yes, ma'am. Pero, ma'am, sometimes, I also like to think, no, na as much as you mentioned, diba, the UN has so many bodies and commissions that we can mobilize for such a conflict. So would you say that as much as we are critiquing the UN in many ways for sometimes its ineffectiveness, would you say that it's also still better that we have the UN?
Yes, definitely. Because it keeps the communication lines open. Sabi nga nila, if you don't have it, you will have to invent it. Diba? So that if you want to air out something, you want to vent, you have to express your rage. Somehow, there's a forum. Oo. That to me is there. If you listen to the United Nations General Assembly, remember when all the speeches are delivered in September, doon makikita lahat yung mga iba-ibang points of view.
Siguro, ma'am, ano naman, since you represented the Philippines in missions abroad, diba, ma'am? Siguro let's try to also look at the conversation from siguro the perspective of the Philippines. So from our end, no, how do you see what's happening in the Middle East affecting us in the global international affairs, and also how should we position ourselves, siguro? Na para how do we navigate? Siguro that's the better way of framing it.
Okay. Historically, they said we were the vote.
Yes. That broke the tie. Yes.
That broke the tie, right?
Yes, wow.
So you look at it that way. Ouch, right? Okay, but was it a good ouch or was it a bad ouch? Okay. Second, for us, we are always seen as a country of migrant workers. So when they look at the Middle East, Pilipinas yan, matatamaan yan, together with parts of India. Okay. So from that human aspect alone, I think we have an interest. Maybe we might say, okay, culturally or religiously, we are closer to the Judeo-Christian nation than with the Arabs. But then, when I voted in the UN, when I was in Vienna, I always thought I also represented the Muslims. That's why sometimes I would abstain. They said, but why don't you vote with us? I said, look, guys, we have Muslim population. So we really have to take steps slowly and not easily be swayed to go one end or the other. And I think this is where the humanitarian aspect of diplomacy would come in. And I think that is what we need right now. More than the political, is the humanitarian.
The humanitarian. I really like, ma'am, how you framed it a while ago na firstly, we need to understand the historical context of the conflict for us to have a big picture of it. And then, right now, to respond to it, I like what you said that it should be about the humanitarian approach more than the political
Yes,
approach.
because if you look at it from the humanitarian point of view, and you will see the effects on children, on women especially, they're always the ones who suffer most in the war. I mean, women are raped because rape is used as a weapon of war. And of course, whenever that happens, of course, as a woman, I always feel like, oh my God, why is our body being abused and exploited, right? It's as though we don't own it. And at the same time, if you look at it from that point of view, perhaps the political aspect of it should be able to give a pause and say, how can we address the humanitarian aspect without really giving up your sense of pride, your sense of sovereignty as a nation?
All right, ma'am. Siguro, as a way to ease into closing the conversation that we have now, ma'am, may mga perspective din kasi na nagsasabi na relying too much on institutional solutions, no? Or siguro to put it bluntly, having too much faith sa mga institutions kagaya ng UN pagdating sa pagresolba ng mga problemang kagaya nung sa nangyayari sa Middle East ngayon, sa Israel at sa Palestine. Some would say na yung reliance so much on these institutional approaches might also cause na mas maraming kabiguan or failures. What can you say about that?
For one thing, I just really admire how the UN has put up the legal structures in everything. Because for one thing, you have just the UNCLOS alone. That's a UN, right? The Universal Human Rights Declaration, that's UN. Everything that governs every aspect of our lives is really put in principled conventions, in principled treaties, agreements by the United Nations. The problem is the countries who signed on to this started to not respect them. The UNCLOS, if you talk about the arbitrary tribunal, isn't it? Hindi naman kinikilala ng UN, ng China yan. And then if you also look at what is happening at the invasion, Russia, why did it invade Ukraine? Yung mga ganon. So, parang ang ganda-ganda ng bahay mo, sinisira mo. Parang tayo mismo, di ba? If you can get away with it. So now Russia and China think they can get away with whatever they want to do. Yun ang nakakalungkot sa UN. But ideally, I love the UN and its work because of all what it has built through the years to make the world a better place to live in, if only everybody honored what they signed years ago.
So how do you see the future of the UN? Let's end with that.
I think the problem is, how do you discipline it? Doon ang aking problema eh. How does the UN discipline people who don't follow the conventions and the rules? Siguro, if they can find a way to handle disregard for international law, for the rule of law, maybe we'll become a better place, because the UN really is as I said, it has laid out beautiful principles and guidelines. It's just implementing them and making people behave with these rogue countries. That's the main problem right now.
All right, ma'am. Siguro to end on a lighter note. Do you miss your work in the UN, ma'am?
No, really, because it's very slow. It's a slow process, di ba? Like I wasn't in the South African Apartheid Commission, but I don't know. I think it took them almost 20 years. I prefer education because at least after 4 years, you see whether the student is better.
May learning outcomes.
yeah, that's right. So makikita mo yung change, di ba, within 4 years. That's why I love it better.
Alright. Okay, ma'am. Alright. So, thank you. Maraming salamat po, Ambassador Laura del Rosario, for your time and for sharing with us your insights about the United Nations and the ongoing Israel war operations in Palestine. Hanggang sa susunod pa pong mga pagkakataon, ma'am, we will invite you definitely again.
Definitely.
Here. Maraming salamat, ma'am.
Parang bitin nga lang.
Yes,
kasi
ma'am.
mabilis.
Yes, ma'am.
Maraming salamat.
Habang tumatagal ang Israel war operations sa Palestine at iba pang mga bansa sa Middle East, dumarami ang mga nagiging paglabag sa karapatang pantao. Tampok dito ang maraming casualties na mula sa mga vulnerableng grupo tulad ng mga bata at kababaihan. Kaya't lalong tumitingkad ang hamon sa mga global governance structures like the United Nations at mga kasaping bansa nito na kagyat na magbigay ng humanitarian relief habang nakatanaw sa pagbubuo ng mas long-term solution sa nagpapatuloy na krisis sa rehiyon. Muli, maraming salamat sa lahat ng mga tumutok sa ating talakayan ngayong araw. Pakinggan ang mga previous episodes ng aming podcast sa aming official Spotify account, The Katipunan Dialogue Podcast. Para naman sa lahat ng mga interesadong dumalo sa darating na 6th Katipunan Conference, just visit the UPCIDS website cids.up.edu.ph para mag-register. Maging bahagi ng talakayan tungkol sa Philippines' strategic outlook on national security and economic resilience. Magaganap ang 6th Katipunan Conference sa November 5, 2024 sa Arete, Ateneo de Manila University. I-follow at mag-subscribe sa official Facebook page at YouTube account ng DZUP 1602 at ng UPCIDS for other announcements. This is Aaron Mallari. Thank you very much for listening. See you again in our next dialogue only here in DZUP 1602, Kasali Ka.